Okay, in our previous video discussion, we learned that variables are very vital to research. In an essence that it is an aspect, okay? Meaning to say, one of the aspects of research is to describe it. Is to describe and explain variables. That is why it is very vital or very important to research. Now, in this video presentation, we are ready to discuss the concept of variables. So in order for us to discuss the concept of variables, first we must know what is the definition of variables. So to know the definition of variables, let us have this example. Let's say we have two nationalities. We have American and Filipino. Okay? Now, we will try to differentiate American from Filipino. Let's say differentiate American and Filipino in terms of their skin color, in terms of height, okay, in terms of language, let's say in terms of the government, okay, in terms of eye color, and in terms of currency. Okay? So, let's try to differentiate the two. So, Americans, naturally, they have two skin colors. They can be white or black. While Filipinos, the skin color of Filipinos are naturally tan brown. Now, in terms of height, Americans are much taller, whereas Filipinos are much shorter. Okay? Then, language, Americans use English language, while Filipinos use Filipino language, of course. In terms of government, Americans have federal government, while Filipinos have democratic government. In terms of eye color, Americans have different eye colors. It can range from black, blue, green, brown, etc. While Filipinos naturally have two eye colors. It can be black or it can be brown. Now, in terms of currency, Americans use dollars as their currency, while Filipinos used Philippine peso. Okay? Now, using this illustration, how can we define variables? Okay? So, with this illustration, take note of these distinct characteristics. Can we say that these characteristics made Americans and Filipinos differ from one another? Can these characteristics differentiate American from Filipino? Obviously, yes. Okay? So, can we say that Americans really differ from Filipino? Obviously, the answer is yes. So, meaning to say, this set of characteristics we have here are actually pertaining to the variables. Okay? This skin color, height, language, government, eye color, currency, these all, or this set of characteristics actually pertain to variables. Now, with this illustration, how can we define variables? Okay? Simply, variables are the set of characteristics. Okay? These are the set of characteristics or properties in which the member of the group really differ or vary from one another. Okay? So meaning to say, in our example, this set of characteristics, which are actually the variables, differentiate two groups Okay? Two members of the groups, which is Americans and the Filipinos. And can we say that are they or do they really vary from one another? Obviously, yes. Because by looking at the characteristics, we listed down several differentiations. Okay? We listed down several differences. Now, variables, okay, are actually, or variables actually have two components. Okay? Actual variables are actually consist of two components. And these two components are characteristics and possible values. So what is the main difference between characteristics and possible values? Okay. So in order for us to discuss the main difference between characteristics and possible values, we will have this example. So let us have this example. Okay. So let's say, for example, we have the variable sex. We have the variable civil status. Okay. We have the variable ethnic groups. We have the variable number of tourists in a certain area. Let's say we have socio-economic status. Then we have educational attainment. Okay? Now, with these variables, let us try to list down some possible values. So in terms of sex, it can be classified into two. It can either be male or female. In civil status, we can have single, married, we can have divorced, and widowed. In terms of ethnic groups, we have many, but let us try to list down some possible, okay, some enumerations. Let's have Tagalog, which are actually came from Taga-Ilog, Tagalog, Bicolano, okay, then we have Cebuano, and etc, etc. Okay, number of tourists, let's say it can range from 500, 600, 700, and so on. Socio-economic status, let's say 1 peso. So this will be a low range. Let's say 1,000 peso. So this is a middle range. And let's say we have 100,000 peso. So high range. Then we have educational attainment. Let's say no education at all. Elementary. Okay. We have high school. Or let's say we have bachelor's degree. We have doctorate or postdoctorate. Okay. Now, using this illustration of examples, how can we define characteristics and possible values? Now, this set variables here is actually the characteristics. While this set here at the right hand corner, they are actually the possible values. Okay? So meaning to say, characteristics, okay, characteristics are considered to be the actual names for variables in which they can have possible values. Okay? So meaning to say, characteristics are the actual names of variables, while possible values, okay, are actually the categories in which the characteristics can be classified. So meaning to say, it is the classification of the characteristics. Okay? It's the classification of the characteristics. Now, with that said, okay, if the characteristics, okay, if the characteristics are the actual variables or the actual names for variables, then what will be the scientific term for possible values? Okay, if the characteristics are the variables themselves, what are the possible values? So possible values are actually the data. Okay? They are actually the data. Now, what do we mean by data? So, data, okay, if the variables is the set of characteristics, okay, the data is the set of possible values for each variable. Okay? So, if the variables are the set of characteristics, then the data would be our set of possible values that is related to each variable. Okay? So, that would be the main essence of the two components of variables, which is the characteristics and the possible values. So, to recap once more, variables are the set of characteristics or properties in which the members of the group really differ or vary from one another. And it has two components, characteristics and possible values. Whenever we say characteristics, they are the actual names for variables in which they can have possible values, while the possible values are actually the categories in which the characteristics can be classified. So if the variables is the set of characteristics, then we can assume that data is the set of possible values for each variables. Okay? Now, variables are not only present in quantitative research. Actually, variables are present in all kinds of researches. Okay? All kinds of researches make use of variables. Okay? And variables are generally classified into two. So we have two general classifications of variables. And what are those two general classification of variables? We have qualitative variables and quantitative variables. So in our next video presentation, we are now ready to discuss the two general classifications of variables, and we will start with the qualitative variables.